More investors hold the potential to give regenerative agriculture the push it needs, but are we willing to pay the price that all of those companies' money comes with? When you really take a look at the hard facts, the big-ticket investors we need aren't really all that concerned about the environment, sustainability, farmers, or even what kind of poison that's being fed to the population. Their interest is purely driven by monetary value. And right now, the public opinions around organic produce, sustainable living, and avoiding pesticide use are placing pressure on these big names. If they can at least make it look like they're making moves in a direction that pleases the masses, then their sales stay stable, or it even goes up. Do nothing, and public displeasure, cancel culture, and boycotts threaten their profits. So even if their interest is very superficial, can we really complain about their motives if it's bringing some motion to a system that's in dire need of change? Well, it depends on how you look at it. The farms and the stores and the factories, insurance, and the seed and chemical distributors are all intricately linked to one another. If one falls, they all crumble. The food chain has many little side roads that are all connected, and we need to disassemble those first, before we can decide how it all fits into the big picture. To start, you'd think that this begins at the farm, where the food grows, but you need to backtrack some more. Beginning with the seeds. No commercial farm grows just regular old seeds. They grow the genetically modified seeds provided to them by those big companies that we were talking about. If you grow a stalk of corn from those seeds, they can't be replanted. You will forever need to buy seeds from them. But if farmers could just be growing a plot for just seed storage, why would they bother buying them then? Because their insurance demands it. And here's where the first set of greased palms shake on a deal. Insurance and GMO Corp understand full well that they need each other to survive. The GMO guys aren't needed if people can just grow their own seeds. But if your insurance refuses to cover your crops in the event of a loss, because you didn't buy what was on their approved list of crops and companies that supply the seeds for those crops, well, you're going to buy the seed because you can't risk losing your coverage. The insurance gets a good kickback for the fine print they put on their forms. You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours. Did you know insurance gives you better coverage for certain crops? Corn, wheat, and soybean give you the best safety net. Now the market is flooded with wheat and corn, both crops that have been leached of their nutritional value thanks to the ridiculous speed at which they grow. So why all the wheat and corn? Because it's cheap to add to absolutely everything. Almost every boxed or packaged food contains wheat and soy to bulk up the weight. Have a look at the package. If that were the case, the ingredient list would have just had one item on it, and maybe a few spices and herbs. Look for vague descriptions like flavorings, preservatives, syrup, oil. Words like syrup can be the runoff from rice, wheat, corn, or any produce really. Same goes for the word oil. Preservatives, well, that can be salt, sugar, or anything that's high in sucrose and sodium, because both of those do technically act as preservatives. So by that logic, you can pump up to 20% worth of corn, soy, and sugar run off into that burger patty and call it preservatives. There's even arsenic fed to cattle, and the only reason that there are trace amounts of arsenic given to the cattle before they go to slaughter is because it makes the meat appear more pink on the shelf. That's literally all it does. So what's a little poison if it makes that T-bone look shelf pretty? Look, we can harp on about how terrible our Frankenstein corn is and where they manage to sneak it into our food to save on costs while it's making us sicker. But that's a video for another day. But we are getting sicker, that's obvious. Obesity rates are through the roof, and once rare diseases like cholesterol and diabetes are killing thousands every year. Who do you think is banking off of this? The other insurance, health insurance. And so the cycle is a never-ending whirlwind of major corporations and brands and industries that are all reliant on each other if they want to continue to make their billions. So how do we get off the hamster wheel? And what does this have to do with companies investing in regenerative ag? It's our choice whether or not we buy their products, get their insurance, or if we get our loans from them. But there is no one else to get it from. They've squashed all the other competition, and they are all that's left. Getting into the seller's market without those resources is next to impossible, so you willingly take what they have to offer in exchange for following their set list of rules. The companies still need us to buy from them, and the market is beginning to demand better. With that sustainable label at the forefront, lots of big industries have begun to make a show of investing in regenerative agriculture. And now we finally get into the actual question that we posed in this video. Is the investments from these companies, that certainly don't have our best interests at heart, even worth it? Despite our obvious displeasure with their motives, the answer is yes. Because as much as we despise this dance with the devil, this is the most practical way to get the much-needed funding for changes to take effect. A fair amount of the bigger players that have caved to public pressure have done so in the smallest, most cost-effective ways that they possibly could. Simple things like planting wildflowers on the outskirts of fields or putting in drip irrigation to water crops, actually reducing flooding on rice paddies. These inconceivably simple applications had groundbreaking results. Pollinator populations skyrocketed, water usage went down by 60%, groundwater contamination went down by 70%, beneficial microbial life tripled, and crops yielded higher quantities. Nature just has a way of thriving when given half the chance. Now, with these unexpected increases in produce and decrease in costs from a monetary standpoint, they could only gain from applying the practices that they themselves proved to be effective. And the excitement brought on by their unintentional success now demands that they extend these studies. Finally, Team Regenerative gets a few game points. Here in the US, every major food supplier is fighting to keep the current way of doing things just the way it is. But the rest of the world is not in agreement. Just this year, Mexico has banned all corn imports from the US. This is huge news. Mexico is a massive consumer of corn. It is their traditional staple and has been for thousands of years. But 80% of their corn comes from the US. By doing this, the Mexican government has forced its own investors to put their money behind the local farmers, and the locals have come out in spades. There hasn't been a dip in the supply at all. Not only are they growing more indigenous varieties, they're doing so with techniques that have been used since ancient times, and they're keeping up with demand, all while they're creating more jobs and a better, more stable economy. Europe, especially Scandinavia and Russia, have been walking away from Western practices for years now. So has China. The amount of additives in our packaged foods that are illegal, there are too many to count. And that translates over to how animals are reared and how farms are managed. Certain pesticides are banned outright. Some of what we are encouraged to use here in the US have the same contagion label as the poisons used in chemical warfare. Not even kidding, Agent Orange and our pesticides that are dumped by the ton from helicopters are seen as poisons of the same deadly shape. Our major corporations can fight to keep their house of cards standing all they want, but the rest of the world is proving that they are wrong. The reality is that the everyday man's opinion has changed over time. And if the regular Joe is willing to pay more for food that was grown by a market gardener at an Amish store, or heaven forbid, decides to grow it himself, well then those big leagues start losing money. And it's the money that shouts the loudest at the end of the day. So we're getting the push we so desperately need, even if it's not with the same good intentions that we have. But it is what it is. Without big industry investment, we're never going to get any changes done. Nor are those changes going to be permanent if the pressure goes away. The road ahead is still a long one, but it has begun. Call us overly optimistic, but we are hopeful for the future. Even if it's driven by money now, if it's applied for long enough, then regenerative agriculture will become the norm again. Just like commercial farming as it stands now became the norm after the Industrial Revolution. If the consumers continue to demand change and the farmers actively sign up to prove that their organic produce performs better than the ones being forced onto us does, well, the taste of the steak and the peas on your plate will speak for itself, and the money and the extra tonnage produced every year will do the rest. Maybe there's a pothole that we're missing somewhere. You can tell us what you foresee that we haven't. But if the last 10 years and the mass move away from commercial practices from the rest of the world is anything to go by, well, progress has been made. We want it to go faster, but we also need to realize that Rome wasn't built in a day. Overhauling the entire system overnight will cause a food crisis, but it'll certainly go a lot more smoothly if Big Corp would just lay down the reins and stop making it damn near impossible to get things done without this begging and fighting for them to give even the smallest amount of shift from their lab-grown pedestal. Here's to the next 10 years of change and success, a whole lot of prayers and hope. The future of our land, and an end to the struggle that the people who are feeding us all face every day are at stake. We want to be grateful for what little traction we've gained, but the more time is wasted, the more of our farmers are being choked off the table by the restrictions and bigger fish that are swallowing them whole. And with that, we leave you to ponder the future with us. We might be hopeful, but are you? How do you think the next 10 years are going to go for us? You know the drill. Give us your 2 cents in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and share. Your engagement is what keeps the lights on over here. Until next time, bye.